Good morning and welcome back to Spid's YouTube. This is going to be pretty different. My laptop has perished in a sad state of affairs, which means that we can't do our normal Google slides. We can't go through the CDS finals in the normal fashion that we normally do. But I have printed out some Google slides and we're going to talk about this, goddammit, because if I don't make a video now, there won't be one for like weeks about the CDS finals. And what happened last season is that I took a break for a couple of weeks because I didn't want to make a video about it, and then a video didn't happen about CDS finals last time. So this is what we've got. It's this or nothing. So I've printed out some slides. I'm holding my phone in my hand trying to record this. I don't expect the audio quality to be amazing because it's my phone microphone right now. But hopefully this can sate what we need for Spid's YouTube. I'm not happy with this solution, but it feels like the best solution that we've got. So I've printed out some slides. Hopefully this is what we can do. We won't be doing a VOD review in this episode. I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. And if we do a VOD review, it'll probably be weeks in the future. And at that point, I don't expect it to be too enjoyable. The full VOD for the finals, including the games that weren't shown on the finals, is on the Champion Draft Series YouTube channel. It shows both perspectives of the hands. If you watched the broadcast, you would have seen me versus the player I fought in round one. Spoilers, by the way. Obviously, throughout this, you'll see the opponent that I fought in round one, the opponent that I fought in round two, and the opponent that I fought in round three. You'll see 1 and 2 on the broadcast. You will see part of you'll see 1 and 3 on the broadcast. You'll see part of 2 on the broadcast. If you want to see all of 2, you can watch the VOD that's on the Champion Draft Series YouTube page. That's pretty much all I wanted to go over. There won't be any editing in this video. If I start rambling, so be it. I don't know how my phone is supposed to edit this YouTube video. You can also see me in the background because this is how the light setup works in my kitchen. Okay, so CDS finals. Let's go. Okay. So, base level information. So for the Champion Draft Series, in case you're unfamiliar, somehow you're 2 minutes through a video where you don't understand what the format is and you're watching someone crazily print out Google slides. Base level information, Champion Draft Series. We drafted champions 10 odd weeks ago. We just did the group format. I don't know how to describe it. The Swiss rounds, where I fought every enemy gamer once. There were 10 contestants, so I fought all. We did 9 weeks of a round robin. That's the right word. And we came 6th, but top 6 do the top cut. And I can go over the champions that we drafted in a little bit of time. So the top cut format works, wherein seeds 1 and 2 from whoever did best in the Swiss rounds or whatever it's called, the round robin, skip the first round of semifinals, right? So there are 6 slots. 1 and 2 skip the first round, which means 3 through 6 fight each other. Then whoever wins out of those moves on to fighting 1 and 2. I think I have that on another slide, but I haven't gone through these that much. Prize pool, which I actually forgot about all season, had money in it. But also, based on what happened last season, whoever gets first presumably does a re-entry into the next season of the Champion Draft Series. For some information on me, my laptop died, and I don't play LoR on my phone very much. I'm not really a phone gamer for Legends of Runeterra, the video game. And so I think this was a pretty big negative, both for my prep and for my play. We'll talk about it later, whether that actually affected the outcome of the matches, but I think that's a big point to go into this, saying that like going into the tournament, I'm feeling like I'm on the back foot purely because my laptop is dead and I'm not a laptop player. I'm not a phone player for Legends of Runeterra. I know Margin Bay plays all of his tournaments on his phone when he's out and about playing other video games and winning those, but that's not who I am. And I also won the previous CDS, so this is my second time going through of the 2 seasons. I won the first season, and I think it's worth mentioning that I do have that sort of like baseline level skill from having done CDS before. It feels a little bit weird to call it a skill, but yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide. By the way, I did print these in white. I know like Jansport's going to be upset that it's bad for the eyes, but I didn't want to waste too much printer ink, and I didn't. When I printed these, I didn't want to go to Officeworks and be like, hey, can I put in black paper? That seemed like too much of a hassle. Okay. Top cut format. So in the quarterfinals, it was me versus Shardox. It was also Cephalopod versus Jason Sensational. Then Sir Termin fought whoever won out of Spids and Shardox, and Margin Bay fought whoever won out of Cephalopod and Jason Sensational. Then the finals are the winners of the semifinals. That's all you need to know about the top cut format, but it shows who we're going to need to prep for in order, right? So from my perspective, the goal is to win the video game, right? There's no real point playing for 3rd or playing for 4th. I may as well go for 1st, right? Because I get the re-entry. This may not be true for everyone. Their goal might be to have fun, or their goal might be to build a lineup that's enjoyable and see how far they get, blah, 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 blah. My goal was to win, right? So with that goal in mind, I must 100% play Shardox, right? if I don't beat Shardox, I can't win, so we have to assume that I'm beating Shardox to actually make this goal happen. Therefore, I've got a 100% chance of also fighting Sir Termund. Provided I beat Shardox, I need to be able to prep and beat Sir Termund. Then the finals has a 50% chance on Margin B, 25% chance for Traditional, 25% chance for Cephalopod, right? Prep requires me to build lineups primarily into Shardox and Sir Termund, but also have plans into Margin Bay, Sensational, and Cephalopod, right? So when I'm prepping, I have to make sure I can beat Sir Termund and Shardox, but also have plans into Margin Bay, Sensational, and Cephalopod. I just touched the thing that's holding my phone. I hope that did not make a loud noise. Okay, these are the God. These are the champions. So I, Spitz, the redeemed qualities, have Gwen, Leona, Draven, Nilla, Kennen, Lucian, Sejuani, Kaisa, Gangplank, and the Porro King. Shardox has Victor, Alawi, Lux, Renekton, Elise, Shen, Lysandra, Annie, and Jin. You don't need to remember all of these. I'll highlight them when we go over the prep later. So Tournament has got Aphelios, Volibear, Ezreal, Twisted Fate, Veigar, Elder Dragon, Maokai, Caitlyn, Vladimir. Margin Bay has Zoe, Jace, Thresh, Master Yi, Ryze, Heimerdinger, Nasus, Yumi, Lee Sin, Nami. Cephalopod has Vayne, Kindred, Morgana, Echo, Zillion, Ornn, Rumble, Jack, Set, and Sensational has Janna, Yasuo, Karma, Katarina, Nocturne, Fierce, Galio, Nico, Udyr, Ashe. If you're just listening to this as audio, which I probably recommend considering the video isn't that useful, you can do that. Okay, spreadsheet time. This is the only part that has color, so let's go over the spreadsheet. So this was my prep spreadsheet. This is what we had before we locked in decks. Deck lock was, I think, 2 days before the games. So having some time to prep was quite important. Go up to the top. Shardox from Arcane, in our mind, had about 5 different things we sort of wanted to prep for. These were Alawi piles, Lux piles, Annie, Jin, Victor piles, and Renekton piles. If we look at what Shardox has brought over the previous weeks, these are the themes that came through, right? Alawi piles are things like Shen Alawi like Renekton Overwhelms, Alawi Lux was pretty common, etc. Lux piles, we saw like Lux Victor once, but also again like Lux Alawi. There are typically 6-cost spells in these decks, but outside of one Lux Victor, 6-cost spells weren't really that big of an influence in these decks, right? It was typically Lux just there as a 5-drop that had maybe 6 spells she could synergize with, but that's about it. Annie Jin. Sometimes this was Conservatory, sometimes this was Aggro Annie Jin. In this, we assumed it was Aggro Annie Jin because we did not think that Conservatory Annie Jin was going to be that good. Victor piles. These are things where you just play Victor and then hope that things work out. I think this is a relatively common strategy in like low power formats like these. That's what you can imagine a Victor pile. Renekton pile is just some sort of overwhelm thing. Last time we fought Shardox, we saw a Shen Renekton, and there was a chance that we saw something similar to that. So we need to make sure we can 100% beat Shardox Arcane, and we'll go through these decks and if they were able to do it or not. All right. Sir Termund from Arcane. He doesn't have a limited champion pool, but the decks that he brought was rather consistent in that it was pretty often Ezreal, Twisted Fate, and Tree, and then the third deck would switch around between Mill and then Elder Dragon, Volibear, and Aphelios PNZ as like a regular pile deck. You're thinking these things like Temple and, it's the sort of like ballistic bot piles that you may be used to fighting in the past. And so these were the decks that we were sort of preparing for. We thought Tree and Ezreal Twisted Fate were pretty much locks for what he would bring. It's just like, is it going to be Elder Dragon Volibear or something else from Volibear? Is it going to be Aphelios PNZ pile or is it not going to have that? Then I've put Margin Bay Worlds over here. He should probably belong here, but we put a lot more effort into putting into Margin Bay just because there's a 50% chance we fought Margin Bay as opposed to Cephalopod and JC Sigil, who are only 25% chance. So Margin Bay brings every single time, without fail, Zoe, Yumi, Thresh, Nasus, and Ryze. We don't have to worry about anything else with Margin Bay. Those are his 3 decks. I did not think he was going to change for the finals, and if he did, he still probably would have brought one of these decks. We'll quickly go over Cephalopod. I had Rumble, Vayne, Jackset, Echo, Zillion, and Morgana piles as the sort of stuff he would bring, but it wasn't too strong, right? Cephalopod can sort of bring anything he wants, and while I assumed he would bring at least 1 or 2 of these, there's totally a world where he brings something completely out of the blue, and I don't think that should really surprise anyone too much. And then J Sensational, I put Yasuo, Katarina, SIPZ Control, and Galio. This was not that strong of a read, if I'm going to be honest. J Sensational was sort of like a last effort thought for this, mostly because I fought him in week 2 or week 3, and I hadn't been following his storyline too much. And so this is like the stuff I was preparing for back then outside of the Galio deck, and so I still put this here. Yasuo Katarina is a lock for J Sensational. There's no world in which he doesn't bring Yasuo Katarina. And Galio, I saw him do somewhat consistently, at least the sort of idea of like a big mid-range deck, either with an Nico or with the Udyr, is what I was expecting from J Sensational. But this isn't like a strong read, right? A lot of these other ones are more strong of reads. This one is not as much. All right. This is a massive fucking pool to prep for. This isn't like an open where there's like 2 decks that you're thinking about, like Morgana, Elder Dragon, and then a bunch of other things that you're not really thinking about too much. This is a massive pool. So to be able to try and win all of this is a tall fucking order. And so preparing for this was not an easy task. So the first thing that we thought of was like Ravenbloom Conservatory, right? This was the main idea that we started with, primarily Nilla Gangplank. By the way, what you're seeing here is the final version of this spreadsheet. Not all of these rows existed when we started the spreadsheet. This spreadsheet started with like 3 rows, right? Conservatory was one of the first ideas that we started with. And I think it made sense. Like even before I made the spreadsheet, Conservatory was high up on my mind. Conservatory does really well into Shardox, right? These sort of like mid-range piles like Alawi and Lux and Renekton sort of falter when you can just play Ravenbloom and Broadmane and sort of just like control them through the mid-game and then try and beat them afterwards. That's what Ravenbloom is sort of trying to do, especially into these types of mid-range, right? There are some mid-range that's going to be able to beat Conservatory. But this type of Conservatory where they're not really rallying that much, like Lux is their only Demacian, and you don't really play your Lux with rallies in the way that Shardox was building it, made me think Conservatory was a really good choice into that. Into Sir Termint, it's a little bit of a weird thing, right? Tree doesn't do great into Ezreal Twistifate, primarily because there's landmark removal in this in the form of Aftershock and Piltover and Tellstones. And then, like, Conservatory can try and deal with the champions, but I just found that, like, things like Ruined Rex would be pretty strong. We didn't put a number in this. I don't think we explicitly tested this matchup, but it was not a matchup I was excited for. Elder Dragon Volibear was another matchup that I wasn't too excited for. They sort of just, like, outvalue me and beat me that way. And Tree wasn't a great matchup. When we had played it, it pretty much came down to, did I have landmark removal for the Tree? And if not, I just sort of stalled out the game and was able to play like Tibulk and win. They do get to run things like Aloof, which can change it, which isn't why it's a big matchup, but it sort of came down to like the Tree game. It felt it was more like a determined decision point for that 55% as opposed to a my decision point for the 55%. The Nephilius PNZ pile was absolutely just awful for us. They just outgrinded us the entire game and was able to do it. Conservatory into Margin Bay, though, was pretty good. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to consider it. Why when we fought Margin Bay during the tournament, like when we fought him during the group stages, what's it called? The round robin. Ravenbloom was one of the best decks going into Margin Bay. We didn't put anything else for these lineups. But anyway, our first thought was trying to do Conservatory, right? Conservatory seemed like a really strong place to start with. The next obvious thing to go into was the Poro King, right? If we think of like the main 3 things that I've been bringing, it's like Conservatory, Poro King, and like Plunder, right? Or like a Sejuani deck, right? I think these are like the main place to start with the lineup. And when we're looking at the Poro King was doing some really good stuff for us. Again, the Poro King was sort of beating Shardox. It was also kind of beating Sir Termint. It beat Shardox by being a bigger mid-range typically, right? Things like Ionia the Poro King or Sejuani the Poro King would do better into the sort of Shardox stuff, right? It just is bigger, it's stronger, it does a more powerful thing. Elder Dragon Volibear, it's able to beat in the way that Poro King typically beats these control matchups, where it's just like exploding the turns before Elder Dragon Volibear can gain back their tempo, and the way that Elder Dragon Volibear and these other like Elder Dragon decks gain back their tempo isn't in a powerful enough a way to beat the Poro King deck, unless it's something like Elder Dragon with like pings, right? Because you're playing for like Broadmane plus ping, but that's not what this Elder Dragon deck is doing, right? It was doing okay into True, and it was doing okay into Aphelios PNZ pile, but it wasn't something amazing, right? Again, this is all pre-lineup submission, right? Once the lineups are submitted, we'll obviously be doing these testings a little bit more, and you might be able to see through the pages that there's another page under this that does show that. We did test into Margin Bay Worlds. If you notice, these underlined things, right? Underlined values are just guessed values, right? So for things like first thing Sir Termint, these were our guesses. We may have screamed some of these, but these were mostly guesses. Maybe we just did the scream once. These were also just guesses, right? But these were things that seemed pretty reasonable to us, right? Against the Zoe Yumi deck, we thought that would bring some sort of like concussive palms and things that would sort of like stun them out a little bit. Kaisar was on things like Quicksand. I think we did test this matchup. I think this matchup right here, the 70%, is the one that got crossed off. Why did I cross off? Because I thought it was 70% and then ended up being something like 40%. And it may have even been less than that. So that's why we crossed off Kaisar the Poro King. We decided it's not what we're bringing to the finals. All right. Then there was this sort of debate about Gwen Sejuani and FTR, right? So we started with Gwen Sejuani, right? I think most of my prep was done with Hash, at least for this stage of preparation. Most of my prep was done with Hash. And Hash seems to be somewhat of a Gwen Sejuani enjoyer. And Gwen Sejuani seemed pretty good there. Seemed pretty good here. We even tested this matchup, and look, we're winning. And we didn't test it into Margin Bay, but it seemed to, at least in Hash's mind, be an okay idea, right? So that was where Gwen Sejuani came from. And then I saw the reason for Gwen Sejuani. I was like, hold on. For the last 2 seasons, I have talked about bringing FTR. Is this finally the time? And Hash tried to think, you know what? FTR is probably alright in general. It sort of does okay things. It's probably beating Margin Bay into Zoe Yumi, although this is something that would need to practice more because I've never played FTR. This is not a deck that I've played very much. So we wanted to practice that more. At least I wanted to practice that more. You'll notice a little note here. I took notes of matchups when I played them, most of the time. The only values that we actually had on the Cephalopod and for J-Sensational were for the FTR matchup, which was Hash's assumptions. They had little underlines on them. Against Cephalopod, Hash's assumptions were all something like 30% bad. Like he was not excited about FTR versus anything from Cephalopod, right? These decks are sort of like combo-y mid-range decks that are able to beat what like FTR's trying to interact with, right? Combo decks put all their value into a certain turn that FTR just isn't able to consistently deal with, and then that just ends up stealing the game. Just Sensational, he thought that FTR would do okay into, but not amazingly was my memory, especially against some of these things where FTR is just like dead in the water into stuff like Deny from Yasuo Katarina and these sorts of things. And what we noticed is even in these matchups, like the Margin Bay matchups, the Saturn matchups, and the Shardox matchups, Gwen Sejuani and FTR were sort of very similar. These decks play extremely differently, but at the end of the day, Gwen Sejuani felt like it was pressuring more, right? I guess to run Omen Hawk as well as Yadulski Snowdog. And that makes it very, very strong. It's able to do quite well into these, right? When we were testing around with these, the numbers above always felt better than the numbers we assumed for the middle. Then we thought about Plunder. Plunder was something we'd written off early, thinking like, if anyone's doing this whole deal, but for me, they're going to be thinking Plunder. Spids has got, Gangplank and Sejuani. We got to play Plunder. And so we got to try and beat Plunder. And I don't think Plunder is amazing into these, right? I tried Plunder into Shardox's lineup. It can sometimes lose. It's not bad into Shardox's lineup. I think it's probably all right into Shardox out of all of these, most of all, but it's not amazing. Against Sir Termund, I think it just loses, right? I think it might be able to beat Ezreal Twisted Fate on really, really specific draws, but we also don't have a great way of dealing with Twisted Fate outside of double ping. And if they get suited up on Twisted Fate, the game's just over. But also, we can't really kill, Sunken Temple. We can't really kill a lot of the things. If Ezreal Twisted Fate spawns out of control, it can definitely easily deal with Plunder. That's sort of true with all of its matchups. We'll talk about that a little bit later, if I remember to. But going into, Tree, Elder Dragon, Volibear, and FLH's PNZ pile, Plunder was, Plunder's typically a very flat deck. Against things like Elder Dragon, Volibear, and Tree, it was definitely not... We didn't imagine it would feel amazing. Into Margin Bay, Plunder's why we lost against Margin Bay, I think. Plunder's really bad into Margin Bay. Then going into Cephalopod and J-Sensational, I'm sure if LoR required you to bring 5 decks to a tournament, Plunder definitely should have been there, right? Plunder would have been amazing as a 4th or a 5th deck. It's very, very flat. It's not anything you can disagree with. I don't think it's part of a winning lineup. I think it's too flat and too boring, right? I just don't think it's there for us as what we need. All right, then we had some cute options, right? Solari aggro was sort of a late minute thing. I know I've been going through this as if it's top to bottom. This was, I think, the last addition I added to this spreadsheet was Solari aggro. And you'll notice Solari aggro doesn't really have many values here, but we did test this one. And we said that it was all right into Zoe Yumi. Then there was the Shelly combo deck. So Donut, ages and ages and ages ago, mentioned to me, I don't know, maybe week 4, that a cool idea would be to do a Shelly combo deck, right? And I agree. Combo decks, I think, are very, very good into this field, right? Combo can beat Shardox from Arcane because none of these things interact with combo, right? So Termit is playing these anti-control decks, right? Tree is a control deck that beats control decks, right? Ezreal Twisted Fate is sort of a control deck that beats control decks, right? This is what this is all supposed to be. Combo decks are really, really, really hard to deal with. And so Shelly combo felt like it would be great into these two. Also felt like it'd be pretty good into Margin Bay, right? Zoe Yumi is not a deck with interaction. Provided that we can make our combo go off before Zoe Yumi kills us, this feels like it'd be an amazing matchup. Same for Ryze and Thresh Nasus. Thresh Nasus can beat you down a lot harder than the rest of these other decks, but Ryze is a very slow deck that its interaction is not direct damage. Its interaction is preventing attackers from coming in with Ionian Stall. Against Cephalopod, it would have been a little bit concerning as these decks do run some amount of pressure, but it's not that much interaction in Rumble Vein, and there's things you can do to try and make Shelly Combo go through. Rumble Vein is probably not a good matchup as Shelly Combo is a little bit slow for Rumble Vein, but there's opportunities for Shelly Combo to try and do things, right? Same with J-Sensational, right? Shelly Combo seemed like a really, really, really appealing idea. So we tested some of these matchups. The first one on this list is Alawi Lux. And this was actually a surprisingly bad matchup, only because all of the versions that Shardox was on were on Sermon in the past. And Sermon instantly counters this Shelly combo deck, right? We're not going to go over the deck lists in this video, partly because I didn't add them to the Google Slides that I printed out. But in these region combinations, there isn't a great way... So this is Kennen from Bandle City, by the way, because you want to play Condense. you don't have great ways of protecting Shelly. You can run things like Heroic Refrain or Bandle Tellstones, but that's a lot of mana to be spending on the turn you're playing Shelly. And so they would just play Riptide Sermon, and unless you had Condense in hand, you were like losing the unit forever. And not only that, they were still dealing like 1 to the Nexus and summoning a 3/3 in an Alawi deck, right? It was a pretty bad time for us. So this was like one matchup that was like, it's specifically bad. Lux piles in general felt all right. Alawi piles in general felt all right. Like Alawi Shen, Lux Victor, I think we would be able to beat pretty decently. But Alawi Lux specifically, because of Riptide Sermon, which is the only deck that I think Riptide Sermon was being ran in so high for Shardox's decks, was specifically a big problem. Against Victor Elise, which is where most of these statistics are coming from, it beat Victor Elise. It was just able to do well. Now, that might have been a fluke. I think we only did that once, and I think I got a good hand, and Hash may have gotten a bad hand. But like this combo deck was feeling really, really strong. It had a lot of really cool elements to it. It was running things like Vic Rash and I think Mirai Warden and all these sorts of things. Conchola just felt very, very good. Against Sir Termund, it was actually beating Tree quite well because this thing combos off faster than this thing combos off. And this deck actually runs very little ways of interacting with Shelly combo, right? They've got the Noxus sweep because it is Vygar Vladimir. So they are able to try and do things like Disintegrate plus a ping or Flock plus a ping. But typically by that point, Shelly has been able to give +1/+1. Here is one of the main theories we came up with much later in the prep. Or by we came up with, I mean it was revealed to me in a dream and then I sort of ran with it. And no one has ever given me like, an excited, hell yes, Bids, that's such a good thought. Everyone has always thought that it's a little bit of a weird thought, but I'm telling you guys anyway. So, Porra King. This is a deck that I understand decently at this point, right? I played Porra King throughout all of CDS and I feel like I've understood it quite well, right? There are two ways in which Porra King manifests itself into a winning strategy, right? Either you have played Porra King and it's generating like 3 or 4 snacks and that insane value over the course of multiple turns is able to get you to win the game, right? Because the Porra King is just busted. Sometimes, especially I think I had this against Roji a few times, where the point of the Porra King is to be a 5 mana, create 1 special snacks because Porra King is getting shot on sight, right? That's all the Porra King can be in matchups like those, right? You play it when it's leveled and never before, and then you're getting that 1 snacks and that's it. That's all the Porra King's doing. It's trading equally in mana, right? Because they have to Sunburst or Vengeance this unit and you're getting a premium card in hand. Compare that to other iterations where you're trying to consistently get value because they're not actually interacting with the Porra King, so that 5 mana that you have invested into this card only gets paid back after a couple of turns, right? Shelly combo is just the Porra King, but for spell players, right? There are 2 ways of playing Shelly, like the Shelly card, right? Sometimes you're playing Shelly and it's going to get immediately shot on sight. So your aim is to just get +1/+1. That's it. That's all Shelly's doing. It's trading in 5 mana for 5 mana because they have to spend at least 4 or 5 mana to try and deal with it. So you're getting your +1/+1 extra value on that 1 turn. In other matchups, you're setting up Shelly so that Shelly can't die, and then you're trying to get multiple +1/+1s because they're not going to be able to interact with Shelly, and that's how you're going to get your value, right? There's sort of 2 ways of getting value from these sort of engines, like the Porra King and Shelly, right? One is to say, okay, Shelly costs X amount of mana. That same X amount of mana is the amount of mana they need to do to interact with Shelly. I'm going to accept that fate, provided I can squeeze extra value out of the cards in my hand or on the field because I'm getting that buff, even though Shelly's about to die, right? That's the +1/+1 line from Shelly. That's getting the free snacks from Porra King before it gets shot. The alternative way of seeing it is I am investing X mana, which is a low tempo play for something like Shelly, into this unit, but over the next couple of turns, I'm going to be recouping all that tempo and eventually have an amazing power turn that's going to let me win the game. And they're not going to try and remove Shelly, they're going to be trying to deal with the other units, but they're not going to be able to do that effectively because Shelly is quite strong, right? These are the 2 ways of which you can view these cards, right? The Porra King and Shelly are just mid-range versions and spell versions of each other. And when I realized that about Shelly combo, all of the matchups seemed to click because I'd be playing the Shelly in the same way that I'd be playing as the Porra King, and it made sense to me, right? As someone that has never played Shelly before, like this week, I'm not a big Nami fan. I can't really enjoy Nami decks, I find, and I never really played any other Shelly combo decks. I never played Fizz Samira. So like this was my first introduction to Shelly decks as playing them, and that's how it sort of made sense to me as someone that's played nothing but mid-range. Anyway, this was pretty much everything pre-prep, right? This is where we got to about pre-prep. These were the 4 lineups we were considering. This one was the first lineup. When we only had like 4 decks here, this was the first lineup. Nilla Conservatory, Kennen the Porra King, Gwen Sejuani. Why this? Nilla Conservatory seemed like one of the best decks we were going to bring initially. It seemed like it had good matchups to Shardox, good matchups into Margin B. It was concerning about Sir Termund, but it's really hard to build a lineup to beat 3 completely different people. Like it's impeccably difficult. So that was the first thing we tried. Then Kennen the Porra King made sense. Like, just look at this, right? Kennen the Porra King. I'm seeing a lot of green. I'm seeing a lot of positive matchups. We knew we wanted to bring a Porra King deck. We didn't know if it wanted to be Kennen necessarily, but if you look at the other options, right? Sejuani was already taken, and so Kennen's like the next best option, right? Unless you want to do Leona the Porra King, but it was either Leona or Kennen as the options, right? Then Gwen Sejuani, right? Looked like it had good numbers into everything, right? So this is just like what looks like it has pretty decent numbers into everything. Lineup 2 is Gangplank Conservatory, Sejuani the Porra King, and Nilla Kennen Shelly. This is the first time we added Nilla Kennen Shelly to this lineup, and what that meant is that Gangplank Conservatory had to overtake Nilla Conservatory. Now, Nilla is a better Conservatory champion, right? It allows you to get the slipstreams, which are pretty powerful in a deck like that. Also lets you run an early unit that is important when the deck is already awkward because it has to run like 6 champions that it doesn't really want to be running. Being able to play Nilla as a very early base champion that's overstated on curve or well stated on curve, which is not what you typically get out of control decks, was quite nice, right? Replacing that with Gangplank, who can be very clunky, especially if you double draw. It's not the worst because he summons the keg, but it's not great. Felt much worse, right? But we do get to do Sejuani the Porra King, so out of Gwen Sejuani, which feels nice. Sejuani the Porra King is definitely my favorite of the Porra King deck out of all of the Porra King decks that I've played. Or out of all of the Porra King decks that I've played. Lineup 3 was Gwen Sejuani, Leona the Porra King, and Nilla Kennen Shelly. So this idea was the first one that got us off Conservatory, because I kept looking at this, and I kept thinking that if I need to beat Sir Termund, I'm bringing Conservatory to beat Shardox and Margin Bay, right? It's not beating Sir Termund, and if Sir Termund keeps it up and I can't squeeze out one of these awkward wins, it's going to feel really, really bad. And I need to play around Sir Termund more than I need to play around Margin Bay, right? Margin Bay is an unknown, Sir Termund's a guarantee. And I just kept seeing this Conservatory matchup, and I wanted to get out of it at some point. It didn't feel right, especially once we found Shelly combo and we had like a second deck that seemed really, really cute, right? We had the Porra King, we had Shelly combo, we had that option. I realized I haven't talked about these two decks. These two decks I had in my brain and then we never played with, so ignore these two decks. I thought Arsenal Control could be cool. I thought that P-Tash Portal Pie, which we brought against Shardox last time, could be a cool idea, but like, which Nilla Kennen deck do I want? Shelly combo is a better Nilla Kennen deck than the P-Tash Portal Pile, I think, just from how strong the Shelly combo deck actually felt. All right. This, and if you watched the stream, you'll know this is where we actually ended up, was Sejuani the Porra King, Sunburn, to clarify, is Solari Aggro, and Nilla Kennen Shelly, right? So what did we like about this lineup? One is that, according to Hash, Solari Aggro was beating Sir Termund, right? We decided on this maybe in the last couple of hours before we submitted lineups, right? Solari Aggro, in his mind, was just good into everything, right? And if Shelly combo is good into everything, like we're seeing that he's going to bring one of these decks, it's going to win, right? Shelly combo seemed to do quite well into the Shardock stuff, and we know it beats Margin Bay, and we thought that it might do okay into these sort of decks, you know. Shelly combo seemed like a lock. A Porra King deck seemed like a lock. You're just seeing enough green that you sort of have to bring the Porra King. The third deck seemed to be Solari Aggro, right? Our mind was that, at least in Hash's mind as well, the green here would appear more so than Conservatory, especially against Sir Termund, who, like, these two players could not be more dissimilar, Shardox and Sir Termund, in how to prep for them, right? This is like anti-mid-range in that sense, right? It's got like it's not even anti-mid-range. It's just like very insularly strong mid-range of like Alawi and Renekton, right? That aren't interacting with the enemy gamers too much outside of some weird Alawi stuff. It's just like insularly strong mid-range. That's completely different to anti-control, right? These are very, very distinct things, and it's really hard to beat something that can beat both of these, let alone a possible third. Anyway, after about 20 minutes, this is what we were looking at. That's 20 minutes of recording. It's so weird because I can see a timer at the top of my screen telling me how long I've been recording for. Normally I don't have that on OBS because I've only got the one monitor of my old laptop. Rest in peace. After about 20 minutes, we have gone through all of this. This is not even going through what we have brought. So now I'll show you the next slide of this Google Slides that I printed out. Ta-da! This is the final matchup table that I worked on for the 2 days leading into the tournament. This took a lot of time. So let's quickly go through it. These were the decks we brought. Sejuani the Porra King, Leona Draven, and Nilla Kennen. So Solari Aggro, Sejuani the Porra King, and Shelly combo. I should say, hold on, let me move this slide back. Hold on. Moving this slide back. I know I didn't really talk about which Porra King decks we wanted to bring. There was like a half talk about Gwen. By the way, we added this last second and then never did it, the Gwen Draven, so it's Conservatory. Kennen was pretty much only there because Kennen is like easily one of the best champions. The Ionia region seems really good into a lot of these enemy gamers. But if Kennen was going to be taken by Shelly, then the next best thing was Sejuani for the Pro King. You could also do Leona, but Leona was taken by Solari aggro. If I just picked the Pro King deck, it wanted to be the Sejuani, and we managed to get that happening through this anyway, which was quite nice. Let's take a breath. Let's talk about this. It's very hot in Melbourne right now, and recording this way is sort of hurting my arm because I have to carry my phone very, very precariously. Okay. Let's talk about the matchups versus Shardox from Arcane. He brought Alawi Lux, Jhin Conservatory, which is like any Jhin except it's running Conservatory, and like the stun cards, but none of the aggro cards, as well as Broadmain and I think Riptide Rex. It's a control version, right? It's Jhin Bandle Control, except instead of Bandle City, it's running Annie and all the Noxus cards. Then there was Lissandra Victor. Lissandra Victor was the same deck that they brought against us last time. It's this like, Iashula Figurehead of the Deep elemental control deck. The top end is like the FTR-esque like Kiss a Cutie card, the 16 mana -1 cost per elemental win con thing. It's a very awkwardly built deck. I'm not going to show it here because I don't know how to edit on my phone, but it's very awkwardly built, and you can see that I thought I was going to be good into it almost based on that alone. Now you can see the guest and the played. We played all of these matchups. I just wanted to double check. But it was really good into Lissandra Victor. Like none of these decks, the Poro King deck just pressures in the mid game. This deck doesn't have great control for big units and relies on freeze and like the 3 mana deal 5 if you've played some spells elemental card. It's the only way it really deals with big units. So this matchup felt fine. Solari aggro. This deck runs like no 1-drops and very few 2-drops and even less 3-drops, right? Solari aggro just like smokes it. Shelly combo. This deck has... So this is one of the matchups where you're playing for tempo, right? You're playing this mostly like Kennen on 1, Nilla on 2, as opposed to keeping Kennen for post-Shelly, right? That's one of the ways of viewing the 2 ways of playing the Shelly combo deck. Cards like, Portal Palooza were just like aggressive, right? This shouldn't be viewed as much as a Shelly combo deck. If you can, you'd get the Shelly combo if you'd like, but this is just like playing units on curve, like bad pirate aggro is how we were beating the Lissandra Victor here. And that's, I think, what these notes say, that little like note icon. Talking about these other matchups, Alawi Lux, we ended up deciding was the ban because we thought that they would ban the Poro King, right? The Poro King was the only deck that seemed like it had fully good into everything there. And so if we wanted to make sure that Shelly combo could get through, we should ban Alawi Lux, right? This was probably one of the few red matchups that we thought this would have. And so we wanted to make sure we banned it. Now, this is the only color that isn't like red, yellow, or green here. This is because I thought that Jhin Conservatory would do good into the Poro King, and Hash thought Jhin Conservatory would do bad into the Poro King. In my mind, this is like 2040... 2080 Shardox's way, and in Hash's mind it's 2080 my way. We played the matchup. I absolutely blew Hash out of the water every single time, which made Hash think that he must have been true. I trust him that this is a really good matchup only because he would know more than I. But in my mind, I thought Jhin Conservatory, the whole point of that deck was to run like as many disintegrates as possible and beat Poro King Sejuani by blocking and disintegrating. I'm not surprised if this number should say 80, but that's why it's purple, because I felt uncertain, and in my time of fear, I went to my color palette in my Google Slides and my Google Excel sheet, and I was like, I need to vent out my frustration by adding purple to the document as opposed to red and green. We never tested these matchups. They didn't seem too necessary to test. I know how to play against decks with Solari aggro like these decks. That's fine by me. And so that's this. We felt pretty good into Shardox, right? At the end of the day, Shardox, I think, brought 3 pretty not great decks, and we brought like 3 pretty strong decks. Like at the end of the day, these are like 3 of the strongest decks I can bring. There's no Gwen here, which is a little bit sad, and there is no Ravenbloom, which I think is probably quite good. But Shelly combo, like, fucked shit up. So Termin from Arcane. He brought Ezreal Twisted Fate, Age of Dragons, which is like a Phelios Elder Dragon. I'm sure you fought Age of Dragons before. It's Age of Dragons. And then Bandle Tree. So here is a little bit weird of a matchup table. So initially, I had this bad as good, right? I had this initially as like 60%. Then the night before the tournament, I realized, so this slot was like empty for a long, long time, but I think we just assumed that it would be good because aggro deck, slow control deck, boom, Boom. This should win. Then we played it and it felt fucking awful. Like this felt miserably bad. I don't think I beat Hash on it and it sucked. And once we realized that we can't actually 2-0 tree, this math got a lot more confusing. This is not an exciting matchup table to look at. I want to quickly explain the 9 slots. Poriking versus Ezreal Twisted Fate. Poriking can do some things quite well, but you need 2 snacks. You can also win with 1 snack plus Ingvar. So like a keep like Lonely Poro Stories Ingvar is actually not a bad keep. It works kind of well, but this deck also runs things like Make It Rain and it runs things like Red Card. So you need to make sure that you're playing your 1/1s not too aggressively without like you need to make sure you're holding Poro Snacks. They should still pop it off even if you're holding Poro Snacks, because if you have Poro Snacks, then these 1 damage pings aren't going to hit anything anyway. But it's really awkward. Most of the times that I did this matchup, I didn't have Poro Snacks or Ingvar early on, and I would be blown out. Sometimes I would have them, and then they can't actually kill the Poro King, right? This is one of those matchups where there's like a big curve, a big variance curve on how the Poro King's able to do into this matchup. The variance is very, very high, but it equalizes rather flatly, if that makes sense, right? It's one of these things where there's a high standard deviation, even though it's a very flat matchup, right? Because again, this deck runs no landmark removal. We could have been on Scholarly Climber. These 2 decks were both on 1 landmark removal each. This one was not, and maybe it should have been. But these are like Temple decks. So if they play Temple, if they just do Twisted Fate into Temple, this deck has no interaction and it wins, right? This is sort of like the duality between this. The Poro King versus Age of Dragons. The Poro King pops off on like turns 7 through 9, and Age of Dragons pops off on turn like 8. But its pop-off is drawing 6 cards that are all bigger than all your Poros and also have 12 Dragon Boons because they got Aladdis the Gallant and also Elder Dragon, and then we lose. Right, we did this matchup, I think, twice, and in Hash's mind, this was supposed to be good because he was basing it off stats that were wrong. And what I mean by that is Hash was just misremembering what they were. And then we learned that this matchup was bad and we didn't want to do it. In fact, I think it's less than 40% here. I put that as 40% is the chance that they brick, right? The Elder Dragon Aphelios deck was on something like 3 of the Morgana Champion spell, 1 of the Malphite double stun spell, not Malphite, it's Celestial Wanderers. It's ASOL themed, but I always associate it with Malphite for absolutely no good reason. Then it was on something like 3 Blue Sentinel, 3 Aphelios, 3 Cosmic Youngling, 3 Atrani. That's it. Everything else is dragons, right? Everything else is very expensive or Age of Dragons, right? My mind was saying that if they draw about 3 of those cards, I lose, right? They stun once, they do Celestial Wonder once, and they play Aphelios as a blocker, I lose. If they get Cosmic Youngling, I lose. Because after about turn 5, turn 6, they're going to start matching me on curve and being able to play things with Challenger and big stats or Deathless that I can't actually pummel through effectively. And then they play Age of Dragons and then win on that. So this was a pretty bad matchup in my mind. Poro King versus Tree. This felt actually pretty alright. The Tree only wins about a turn after the Poro King typically wins, and they don't have great interaction for the Poro King. Again, they're going to disintegrate the Poro King on site, but this is another play Poro King once it's leveled, get +1/+1 and a bunch of stats, and that's how you try and win this matchup. Things like Poro Stories are really hard for the Tree to deal with, right? If you've got 1 snacks or 1 snacks plus Ingvar plus a Poro Stories, that Poro Stories is summoning a bunch of units really cheaply and effectively. This matchup wasn't amazing, obviously, because we don't have landmark removal and it could have been better. But this, we wanted to keep this up for a reason. We are going to go through all 9, by the way. Solari Aggro versus Ezreal Twisted Fate. Very similar story, except Solari Aggro is a little bit, it's got a little bit more oomph, right? It's able to play things like Ravoon or Leona that aren't able to be dealt with effectively. They can't really deal with 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop too effectively as Ezreal Twisted Fate deck unless it absolutely high rolls. And the thing is, the 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop of Solari Aggro involves things like a 2-2 that makes your other 2-2 also a 3-3. I'm talking about the owl there. You've got Sun Dragon. What's it? Sun Dragon? What the hell am I saying? Sun Guardian, the Badger Bear, right? The 3/4. Which Ezreal Twisted Fate needs to kill on sight because it just becomes too large. You sometimes don't even attack with it until you have Might ready. For what it's worth, this did feel like a Might is very important matchup, and we'll talk about that more when we get over to Mistwraiths. But yeah, this was pretty. It wasn't bad. It was something that I was happy to see, and as you'll see here when we talk about the bans, we do end up keeping Ezreal Twisted Fate partly because of this matchup. Solari Aggro into Age of Dragons, 50-50 again. This is one of the matchups where they could draw 3 of those cards we were scared of, but Solari Aggro can sometimes beat those hands. But also sometimes Solari Aggro also bricks, and then it loses, right? Very flat matchup, I think. Talked about this before. It's pretty bad. Ezreal Twisted Fate versus Shelly combo. They kill Shelly on sight. You cry. That's pretty much how this goes, right? Your swarm plan isn't as good as the Solari aggro swarm plan, right? Like, it just isn't as powerful. But it's still all right. It can do things. Age of Dragons versus Shelly combo. This deck cannot kill Shelly. This deck doesn't run direct damage, right? This is an absolutely insanely good matchup. It's like beautifully good, right? Any sort of thing works amazingly for this. It's just it's so unbelievably good. I cannot put it into words how much it's good. I put it into numbers. What the hell was that joke? Tree. Shelly combo into Tree. This was very, very similar. It was a bit of a mix of both of these, right? So Tree, like Age of Dragons, can't really effectively deal with Shelly. We talked about this earlier when going over the previous spreadsheet, and it's even the same number, actually, 60%. What? That's crazy. You get +1+ from the Shelly before it dies, but that's sort of enough to upgrade your swarm to do quite well, right? Nil is quite good. They can't really deal with cards like Vic Rash. There are nice things you can do. This matchup feels sort of all right. So, talking about the pick and ban, we needed to keep Tree up, right? Tree was like easily our best matchups, and we thought that looking at this, provisionally, to keep Tree up, they're banning Shelly combo. So they know that we're trying to target Tree. At least before we learnt this matchup was bad, we knew from their perspective that they need to protect Tree. To protect Tree, we said they need to ban Shelly combo. There's no way they're keeping Shelly combo up because this matchup is insane. Look at this, 60%. Therefore, I ought to ban Age of Dragons because Age of Dragons is bad, good, but they're banning out the good anyway. So it's just bad and mid, right? Sorry, bad, mid, good, and yeah. So we need to keep up Ezreal Twisted Fate because that way we get slightly better than mid, bad, and the bad is the thing removed, right? I think in Reality Land, oh, by the way, we beat Shardox. I think in Reality Land, they banned Solari aggro, which I was actually really happy with. Because when we banned Age of Dragons, we now had like what looked like pretty good matchups, and we could actually double target Tree, which felt quite nice. And I think in Reality Land, Poro King beat Ezreal Twisted Fate, Shelly lost to Ezreal Twisted Fate, Shelly beat Tree in like a really, really cool matchup, and I really think you should watch it, except for round 2 where I forget to attack with Nilla because I'm playing on my phone, and didn't realize I had a Nilla on the board because I was looking at my hand, and your hand covers up your board on your phone. It's very weird, but we won. We also beat Shardox. We also beat Sir Termit, right? So we actually won both of these, which felt pretty nice, right? We ended up getting top 2, right? Then we had to fight one of these 3 players. Spoiler alert, Margin Bay beat Cephalopod after Cephalopod beat G Sensational. But let's talk about these matchups as I rest my arm. Holy hell, carrying this is a pain. Okay, let's start backwards. G Sensational. I did these scrims against Sleepy Punda, right? So all 6 of these numbers are based off Sleepy Punda scrims. Poro King, let's talk about miss rates actually. Let's talk about it from G Sensational's perspective. So G Sensational brought Yasuo Katarina, miss rates, and Karma set for real. To clarify on the joke, this is Karma set for real. This is Karma Udyr. It's like Karma set, except set isn't in it, so it's way worse. But it's just playing for Karma and regular Freljord control, right? I call this Karma for real. We're going to be calling this Karma for real. I imagined that these decks would do pretty good into Karma for real. Karma for real can't really kill the combo part of Shelly. Solari aggro is very aggressive, and Karma for real didn't really have a lot of ways of dealing with aggression. And the Poro King Sejuani gets to pop off on a certain turn. Poro King Sejuani versus Karma for real felt a little bit sad. I know Poro King Sejuani is typically good into Karma set just generally, is my understanding. This seemed like a little bit scarier, but still, I expected Karma for real to be a really easy, massive target, right? Because I've also fought a fair bit of Karma set, I didn't feel like I needed to scrim against this very much. I knew I was keeping up Karma for real, right? This seemed very, very likely to me. So Sleepy Punda and I wanted to work out if we're keeping up Yasuo Katarina or miss rates. We started with miss rates, because miss rates I assumed I would be keeping up, right? It seemed to me that these matchups would be pretty good. We started off with Solari aggro versus miss rates, and this felt like a true 50%. However, I lost to Sleepy Punda maybe 4 or 5 times out of the 7 times we did it. Why? Because this little note, do you see this note right here? It's very innocuous. It's just a little bit of a black triangle. What that black triangle says is might is the only way to win. And that's just how that happens, right? So miss rates can't deal with might. They don't have vengeance. They don't have a way of dealing with fire spit and might. If you don't draw might though, miss rates matches you on board pretty easily. Maybe not on turn 2, but after turn 2, it matches you on board. And it's able to aggress you really easily, really aggressively, right? Then, you know, if you're trading evenly on board, harrowing beats you, right? Harrowing just gets you there every time. I didn't draw might, like, from over the course of 2 games, maybe something like, you know, 30 draws. And then when I finally saw might for the first time, I didn't win that because my other draws were just not good enough to get there, right? This matchup should be really good because if you draw might, it is really hard for Mistwraiths to win. If you don't draw might, it's really hard for Solari aggro to win. It's very much like one of the Poro King matchups we were talking about earlier. I think it was the Ezreal Twisted Fate one. It's got a high variance. This high variance is baked into one card, which is one of the 3 copies of might in the Solari aggro deck. But you know what? We put that at 50%. It's might draw, but you know, if the other matchups are good, we'll keep it up, right? Next up, Shelly combo versus Mistwraiths. I had pretty good hopes for Shelly combo versus Mistwraiths. It doesn't run a lot of fearsome blockers, but they don't have a great way of killing Shelly except 2 copies of Soul Harvest. Now, in the scrims that we did, it wasn't really the 2 copies of Soul Harvest killing Shelly that was the biggest pain. But what Sleepy Punter has slowly figured out is that Nocturne is fucked up. Nocturne is a big unit that actually threatens quite a lot and can level somewhat aggressively in the Mistwraiths deck, right? Jason had access to Nocturne. And Shelly combo was just sort of getting beaten down and wasn't able to defend itself enough because its pings weren't dealing well with 2 health and 3 health units, right? This matchup isn't awful. I did have some notes on how to save it and like mulligan aggressively for how I needed to win, but it wasn't an amazing matchup, right? If you're playing Shelly on 5, you're sort of losing in the same way that most decks punish Temple on 5 by being aggressive, right? Like Solari aggro beats Temple on 5 by trying to be super aggressive. Mistwraiths beats Shelly on 5 by trying to be super aggressive as well if it wants to be, and it just sort of wins, right? This matchup, I don't remember it too strongly. I feel like there's one piece of the puzzle that I'd like to like click the book and figure out how it works, but unfortunately I can't click this this printout. So I'll never remember what this tiny triangle says. This matchup was the one that saddened me the most. Poro King Sejuani versus Mistwraiths. In my mind, I've got a bunch of expendable units that can trade into their fearsomes once they're large enough, and then cards like Poro, you know, what's it called? Poro Stories and things like Ingvar and Borealis will get me more value than the Mistwraiths, and then I'll go over the top of them and win. Then, the world's craziest thing happened, right? This deck with no interaction, that has been the reason why it keeps losing, is because it's got no interaction, lost when they played Nocturne. So Nocturne does this really, really cute thing where it doesn't... So okay, let's go through like the actual storyline of what happened. We did this matchup. I was super cocky going into it, being like, hell yeah, this matchup seems amazing for me. I've got the perfect mulligan. I've got Poro snacks. I've got Lonely Poro. I'm feeling super high. It became turn 5. Sleepy Punter had attacked twice with fearsomes on turn 3, right? Nocturne came down on turn 5, gave -1, -0 to everything, and I lost instantly on the spot. Because you just can't block fearsomes post-Nocturne with this deck. There's just no way to do it. Now, that is a surprising hand that Nocturne was flipped on 5 and threatened lethal with like 16 damage plus like a bunch of fearsomes, right? That's rare. But then we realized that like Nocturne didn't need to come down on 5. Nocturne can stay in hand until turn 8 or turn 9, provided you can level Nocturne just by attacking with like 2 fearsomes earlier in the game. By the about 13, 14, 15 draws that the Mistwraiths deck will have by about turn 8, right? 15 is maybe a high number, right? It's 5 from Mulligan plus 8. But the 13 draws that Mistwraiths will have by turn 8, as long as one of them is Nocturne, the Poro King doesn't really have a great chance. You play Nocturne on your offensive or your defensive turn and then just spam out units. Nocturne wins. Right? There's nothing that the Poro King deck can really do against that, right? We can't flip Sejuani. We can try and look for Frostbite snacks or 2, but, you know, even then we're blocked, like, this deck's blocking on the next turn anyway. Mistwraiths just, with Nocturne, very specifically Nocturne, beats the Poro King deck quite effectively. And so we ended up realizing that these matchups that I thought were going to be really good were quite bad. Then Sleepy and I went into Yasuo Katarina, and these matchups were pretty good. Sometimes Yasuo Katarina doesn't like draw the nuts, and when it draws a middling, you know, this deck just pummels it down, and like Yasuo and stuns don't do great enough against it, and Katarina is like low tempo, right? If you're pressuring down enough, Katarina can't sustain a board to be tempo, right? Poro King Sejuani was just beating it, right? Sometimes it draws the Blade Twirler into Katarina, into all these things, Janspot. But also, Janspot, this one was only on 1 copy of House Spider. I know you're going to write an angry comment being like, you know, Yasuo Katarina should be on multiple House Spiders. This was on 1 House Spider, and that's why this matchup was really good. Solari aggro was also just doing okay into it. Again, no house spider meant no early blockers, and this deck just sort of pressured them and beat them. Shelly combo. This deck doesn't have actually any ways of dealing with Shelly, the card, right? You can double stun Shelly, and you can Blade's Edge stun Shelly, and you can like Blade's Edge plus I think like one of the 2 copies of Flock Shelly. Maybe they're on all 3 copies of Flock, but Shelly does stick around in this a lot easier, and you're also able to pressure, right? You're able to play Nilla on 2. They can't really kill Nilla on 2. They can't really deal with Vikrash too easily. You can ping off the I am one with the wind, whoosh, or whatever that guy's called. The Vestaya friend. And so we're going to keep Yasuo Katarina up and keep Karmaset for real up if Jason Sensational was to exist. Cephalopod. These 6 scrims were done against Roma. I'm not going to talk about Cephalopod too much, mostly because it's really hard to work out what to do against Cephalopod. Morgana set was kind of like Formidables, but with a weird top end. I did all of these matchups about 2 or 3 times, and it was genuinely just 50-50s across. In fact, maybe slightly under 50-50. It was just really awkward every time, and it's really awkward to talk about because I can't really place my finger onto why it was so tough. This deck was just running like awkwardly efficient units, these things like your Morganas, these things like your blocking Badger Bears, that just have very, very boring but very... It kind of felt like playing on ladder in a weird way. Right, like there are these weird tempo spikes that both of these decks are trying to play for, and they ram into each other in kind of like non-cohesive or like greatly explainable ways, and then it just ends up being 50-50. It sort of feels unsatisfactory that I can't explain this in a better term, but that's how that felt. Echo Zillion, it beats the Poro King because they rally and they chrono break, and you can't beat that. Sly Aggro was doing okay, and Shelly combo, they can't actually kill Shelly, so you just win, right? They're only on 1 Mystic shot, right? They just lose. They just lose, and Shelly just wins. I expected to be banning Rumble Vein. We didn't scrim this. I went to talk to with Hash later that night, and he was like, yeah, you're banning Rumble Vein. And I was like, cool, okay, I can try and beat Morgana set if this happens, but it's going to be very, very weird. Finally, Margin Bay. This looks weird. This looks weird to me. It's going to look weird to you. The intended plan was to beat Zoe Yumi, right? Even when we're looking at like the old stuff over here, right? I want to make sure I'm not showing you too much of my desk. The aim was to try and beat Zoe Yumi, right? Look over here. That was still the aim in my mind. Poro King Sejuani trying to beat Zoe Yumi. Slurry Aggro trying to beat Zoe Yumi. Shelly Combo trying to beat Zoe Yumi. This matchup can sometimes feel not great because of Sparklefly. Hash would always be like, don't worry about Sparklefly, Spid. Sparklefly is not an issue. And then I did 1 scrim against Lucky Boy from Noximus, and then they played Sparklefly and I lost. But that's beside the point. Shelly combo. This was a really, really confusing matchup. This note needed to be like very, very full, and I wanted to scrim it even more. Because this deck, while it does run elusives, needs to also find a way to beat Zoe Yumi. It can't just stop Zoe Yumi. It actually needs to find a way to win, and that isn't easy if Zoe Yumi plays for something like 2 6/6s, right? It's like a really specific weirdness that Shelly combo can struggle to deal with unless you draw the nuts with Shelly combo. With things like Vikrash into Shelly, into Portal Palooza, into Condense on the Shelly, get the portals, blah, 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 blah. Right? All right. My original plan, always, whenever fighting Margin Bay, my original plan was always ban Rise, beat Zoe Yumi, keep up Thresh Nasus. Hash told me, like the night before, you should be keeping up Rise and banning Thresh Nasus. I looked at the lineup and I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, but Rise is a really strong deck, right? I don't really want to play Rise, right? In my mind, Poro King Sejuani, in fact, we can go over this spreadsheet, and this is where I'm going to throw Hash incredibly under the bus. Poro King Ionia, I put this down against Rise as a 20% assumed, right? I didn't scrim this matchup, but I assumed 20%. This felt, in my mind, god fucking awful, right? I have fought Rise on ladder many a time. I know how playing against Rise feels. Rise sucks to fight against with a deck I imagined like the Poro King Ionia, right? Or any of the Poro King deck, right? Because the time that I am expecting to actually apply substantial pressure on turns 5, 6, 7s are the times that they've got about 3 of their landmarks down, are getting stuns constantly, they're pinging 2 on Poros, which aren't typically that large, and setting up for their win con, and are only going to spend their Ionian-based stuns on those turns, right? I imagined this matchup to be dead awful. But you know what? Hash said this matchup was good. Did we scrim it? No. Do you see this underline? This underline right here means we did not scrim it. But Hash said this was an amazing matchup and Margin Bay is going to ban the Poro King. To be fair, he did ban the Poro King last time. But in Hash's mind, they were going to ban the Poroking. So I didn't even have to worry about scrimming this. This surely would never bite me in the ass. Slurry Aggro versus Rise seemed pretty alright. We did scrim this, and while I was like concerned about like double eye draws, I realized that the pressure that you're able to apply means they can't set themselves up that effectively, in the same way that I was scared about the Poroking Sejuani matchup, and you pressure them down and you win. Shelly combo. This deck cannot kill Shelly, so you win, right? It's kind of as simple as that, right? Like your win con comes online before their win con. They do need to spend some resources against your things like your Nillas, like your Pablos. This matchup felt pretty good. Remember, on Shelly combo, we're also on 1 Rex, which felt quite nice, right? Some of these should be considered with that in mind. You can condense your 1 of Rex. Thresh Nasus. Shelly combo seemed bad into Thresh Nasus just based on theory. I don't think we scrimmed any of the Thresh Nasus matchups in the end. I know some of them don't have underline, so be it. But I don't think we scrimmed that at all. But they run Soul Harvest, they run Pressure, they run Thresh. You know, we can't really deal with things like the 4-3, right? This matchup also seemed bad. They sort of outstat you, and Poroking Sejuani seemed quite bad. They outstat you and then threaten you with Nasus, right? So, we kept up Rise. What ended up happening? We beat Shardox, we beat Sir Termund, we lost to Rise. We did come second in the CDS, unfortunately. Very deserved to Margin Bay. He played quite well. And I do think that it was a little bit awkward that I never tested the Poroking into Rise. There were some, disagreements about how I did this matchup, especially regarding Mulligan. I've got some thoughts about that, but I'm not going to go over them now, mostly because my voice is dying. I've been talking all day. But yeah, this is the matchup table we came with. I'm pretty proud of this. I'm proud of the effort that I put into CDS, into the final week of CDS. This is the sort of stuff I love about Legends of Runeterra. Setting up these sort of massive plans that require a lot of effort and crunching all of these details to come up to what I think is the best lineup, and then learning from that, seeing what we can figure out, trying not to repeat history and all these sorts of things. I was pretty proud of this, and I hope that following the theory, you can sort of get some enjoyment out of what I was doing in prep. Overall season reflections. I'm very thankful I was invited to participate in CDS Season 2. I know I said that dryly, but I am genuinely rather thankful. I think participating in CDS has been an absolutely wonderful experience. I did not expect to be invited to Season 2. I remember when they told me that during the Season 1 interview, I was utterly guffawed, right? I was very, very happy. I was ruffling in my seat. It was an absolutely wonderful thing that they invited me to do Season 2, and I'm very, very thankful for that, right? Thank you, Pink Ghost, and thank you for everyone else that was running it. This was sincerely an amazing experience. New drafting format was good, and I think the top cut split works well. The new format with the point buy system, I think, worked quite well. It felt very fluid and fun. And I think top cut 6 actually felt really nice. I think it felt better than the 8 into 4. I quite like the 10 into 6. And I think it creates some intrigue in how to play the earlier rounds differently, right? That was the intention. I'm just saying that the intention worked well. Many factors contributed to second place in lieu of first place. There was a poor draft, right? Jansport and I, while Jansport did help me a lot, it was only a couple of hours talking about the draft. Had we had more time, we could have had someone better than Kaisar, someone better than Lucian. There were many things that could have been better, right? Leona wasn't that great, in all honesty, right? Leona was fine, but wasn't that great. We could have done a lot better with our draft. And I think it's hard to think about that 10 weeks later, is that really what we're going to blame? But I think it's unarguable that a better draft could have put us in a better position. We're so close to winning. If the draft is slightly better, we probably could have won. Poor gameplay and prep for a couple of weeks gave us 6th instead of 1st or 2nd on the ladder. This is kind of large, right? The fact that we had to beat Shardox means we couldn't, against Sir Termund plus the rest of the field, bring mostly anti-control control, right? Because anti-control would lose to Shardox. Shardox can beat anti-control control. While Margin-based Cephalopod, Sensational, and Sir Termund all bring much slower decks, so we can slow our roll to match them and try and beat them on their terms, as opposed to Shardox, who, because we would be so slow against Shardox compared to what he's trying to do, Shardox would be able to go under us and beat us, right? If we got to skip the first round, it would have put us in a much, much better position. Right, because then we know who we're fighting. We're fighting either Shardox or the person before Shardox. It gives us more flexibility, right? It's not guaranteed. It is we still have to prepare for 5 people. But the 5 people we have to prepare for is a lot more thin, right? If that makes sense. But that's one of the reasons why we could have lost, right? It also, getting an extra spot means we have to play less games, and it gives us a little bit more security. It's not, this isn't like a major point to be completely fair, because we still have to prep for everyone to some capacity, but we can change the variables around a little bit. And I think having Shardox and Determined both of the 100% was really, really awkward compared to only having like a bunch of 50% to sort of like play around with more safely. All right, I didn't have a laptop. I want to highlight this like very highly because it feels very important to my personal story of playing this. I don't play at all on my phone. I used to play Lab of Legends on my phone a little bit back before they changed it to Path of Champions. I don't play that much Path of Champions anymore, mostly because I've got some issues with the mode, which I would have turned into a video in January had I had a laptop I could use. But worry yourself not. Maybe I can make that when I get my laptop back. But lack of a laptop meant I was playing on my phone. In the finals, to be fair, I don't think it changed anything, right? In the actual finals, I don't think being on my phone directly made me misplay, right? If I was on my laptop, would I have mulliganed differently in the final game? Maybe, but unlikely. There's a chance that this could have made me lose against Sir Termund, because I would say that playing on my phone is the reason I didn't attack with a Nilla on turn 2. Nilla, there was no blockers for Nilla. I could just attack with Nilla, and I just didn't because I didn't know that I had a Nilla on the field because I was looking at my hand and not the field, right? Which is like, that's a misplay. But that's a misplay that I'm personally going to blame on my inexperience on playing on a phone, right? It's a silly thing to blame because it's like an obvious, absurd misplay. But when you're in a different environment, these are the sort of things that occur, right? So lack of a laptop, I did want to put here. I don't think it actually contributes to second place in lieu of first, but I wanted to mention it just a little bit, right? I think this is the final slide, right? I'm just double checking here. Okay. Thanks and the future. I wanted to thank everyone that has been watching Spid's YouTube and has followed CDS Season 2 with me. I appreciate any comment and feedback that I've gotten over Season 2. It's been a wonderful experience, and you know, being able to open up to see a random Jansport or NAS comment has been absolutely phenomenal. So thank you. I feel like it's a very fun experience to share with people, especially when they like Shardox messages me after a couple of them. Cephalopod sometimes pings me. These are all just like, it's fun to think that I'm not doing the CDS stuff alone. I'm doing it with other people, and not just the people that I'm scrimming with, but also the people like consuming the content I'm spewing out forth. So thank you for following on for CDS Season 2. I hope to do a VOD review of the finals, but being laptopless and uncertain when I will have a device, when I will have device access may mean it's over a month away. Last time I had to delay CDS Finals VOD review by a month, it didn't end up happening. I want to at least VOD rev the Sir Termund games. They were very tight. I mentioned this at the start. It's probably not happening, if I'm being completely true and honest, which hurts, but I know myself enough. And I know that by a month from now, you know, especially because a month from now we'll be in a completely different environment. No one's going to be thinking about CDS in a month from now. You guys have probably already forgotten about it. It was like 4 days ago. I don't expect to be VOD reviewing it, which sucks. I had a lot of plans for Spid's YouTube in January, and then they're just sort of gone kaput. And Spid's YouTube won't just be CDS, and also won't just be VOD reviews. I did have plans. Like, I'm not kidding when I say I had like 3 or 4 things that weren't VOD review related at all. They were mostly LoR related, except one thing that I wanted to make in January. Like, after making the 2023 recap video, I had like a massive fervor. Not even Noxian, just like Spidsian. To like make Spid's YouTube, and then that's the day after is the day my laptop went kaput, and that saddened me. I'm not going to go into too many details about the laptop. I've been spending way too much time over the past couple of weeks thinking about it and trying to organize it, and trying to deal with the fact that a terminally online person has been away from a laptop for a little bit of time. But this is what's currently on my mind. I did want to make some things about like mulligan theory, some theories I had about like playing certain cards in certain spots, as well as some other thoughts I had regarding other things LOR-wise that I wanted to put into a Spid's YouTube, but I don't want to do it via my phone, right? Like, this is very much a last-ditch effort to make something out of CDS. I'm not happy that this is what we had to do, but it's this or nothing, right? I hope you enjoyed the printed out VOD review. Not VOD review. I hope you enjoyed the printed out explanations, right? Even if it's just me rambling about matchups that, you know, are just all in the theoretical. I hope there's some understanding of how we came to our lineup, right, where we started with Conservatory and ended up getting off of it just because of the Sir Termund matchup, and that was pretty important considering like we beat Sir Termund by a hair, and our lineup was like a big part of why, but then we lost to Margin B in the finals. There are so many things I could have done differently, but you know, you can see those at the end of every other previous video, right? I appreciate you hanging around for this hour-long thing. I am going to now have to re-listen to this just to make sure there's no massive audio problems. I'm really scared that there's going to be something where like every 20 seconds there's just like a massive ping. Right, I'm already expecting that you can hear the fan in the background, but I need that or I'm going to die from hypothermia, but for heat. There's a word for this, heat stroke. But I appreciate you hanging around for this. All right, time to check if this is even worth uploading or if I've just talked for an hour to no one. Bye!